Welcome all to the first interview in our second year of Small Talk Big Issues. We are very pleased to begin the second year with the voice of the patient via Shane Fitch. Shane is the CEO of Lovexair Foundation. She has been working in patient advocacy for 23 years throughout Europe. She's based in Southern Europe in Portugal. And we are very, very pleased to have you with us. Thank you for joining us, Shane.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you and Observia, and looking forward to the interview.
Great. So my first question for you, the focus in research in healthcare has traditionally primarily been around finding new drugs, new therapies, and so on. You are very involved in behavioral science and its application to patient support. And my question to you, would you like to see more research in that area as opposed to purely on the clinical side? Do you think that would be of use to patients?
Yes, I do actually, because I think it's really important to get to know and understand each person in order to acknowledge, so they can begin to acknowledge and manage perceptions about themselves and how they manage their health. And as we know, we all tend to deny that we have something wrong with us when that happens in our health. We've got a sudden issue. So that acceptance really is a kind of process, and then we need to get to understand about what can make our body, our mind better, what works for us, what doesn't. I think particularly we see with younger generations also the fact that they're not very recognize the fact that they may be ill or they may have something wrong with them, and they don't want to be stigmatized or feel different, but carry on fitting in, which of course can be a little bit dangerous because they'll tend to keep at bay something that could be preventative and could actually help them long term in better quality of life and so on. So I think that managing our health from a behavioral aspect is actually really important. It's a big challenge for people to stick to a care regime, stick to their treatment, their medication, take it in the right way, the dose, the technique, and so on. So if we could actually begin to understand a little bit more and help people take those first steps in becoming more active, then issues around our health and our healthcare therapies and treatments. And in that way, we should be able to actually save the system money, use it for when we really need it, not overuse it or misuse it, and keep people safe too, because now, of course, more than ever with the blended care, the home care and the hospital settings, people need to stay away from
Mhm.
hospitals and clinical centres. So they've got to become much more competent in managing their care. So I think this is where behavioural science now really is a must.
Well, that leads directly into my second question, which is, as you just mentioned, hospitals, home care, clearly more, let's say, professional healthcare professionals in offices outside of those contexts, pharmaceutical companies, and so on. So as we do begin seeing these more kind of overall blended approaches, um, who do you think should be responsible for these different things? In the end, how do the different players here who are used to working apart, who should be coordinating this to help the patient?
I think it's really important that all the stakeholders come together. I mean, it is a big challenge, but at a high level, it's really, really important, at least to get up structures which can adapt to this digital transformation, to this new blended care model. Otherwise, we're all out of sync, actually.
Hmm.
Healthcare systems are often behind the curve. It's obvious why. It's resources, it's money, it's finance. Bringing them up into the new digital era, and the healthcare professionals themselves, they're not accustomed, really, to
Hmm.
working with digital health tools and resources. So it's important to bring them up to speed. Industry partners they're great facilitators with this. They really are advanced in their approach to therapies, their approach to digital, their approach to care, and their knowledge base is huge. They have many wonderful healthcare professionals and from industry who've been in the system, public, private, so on. So they can help to facilitate and help to co-finance. Patient organizational leadership must be there, because obviously we're designing a patient journey. We're hopefully making it much more in accordance with people's needs. And I think that IT people are key, because it has to be in an IT framework. It has to be an IT framework for communication, for the functionalities, for more advanced artificial intelligence that we're going to be able to do on data, and understanding the data. So educationalists as well, because we're talking about educating while doing, which is the patient journey, and I think learning how to do it. And I'd like to think that the behavioral scientists also now have a much more important role, which I believe is happening more and more in the care journey, what the care journey should look like. So yeah, I really think that we need a whole spectrum of people, and really we need to look at the sustainability models too. Ideally these new innovative care pathways are going to be sustainable and more equitable access for people. And that way we can do a better job than we've done up to now. We're seeing disparities in access to healthcare in many countries across the world, including the wealthy countries. So I think now is the time to step up and get partnering much stronger. The patient organisations need to have a lead role here now. It isn't just a token job, but we do need to be a significant part of this partnering to make the kind of change happen to the healthcare services and the healthcare that we want for the future.
That raises another question, particularly taking advantage of your very international experience. You're originally from the UK, if I remember correctly. You're living in Portugal, you're working in Spain. Do you see big differences? For instance, if you compared the NHS model to the Spanish model, the Portuguese model, and so on, they're quite different in terms of how the national authorities and the national payer works with the healthcare community locally. Do you have any particular lessons that you've drawn from these different environments?
I think we need to have hybrid systems, actually. I think public health is very important. I think we should uphold our public health, but I don't think we should become radical about it. I think it has to change. I think it has to admit that it needs private support and help and be honest about it. And that's a political issue. We don't need to be populist about healthcare. We need to be realistic, and we want. The US model is unsustainable. So how many million people are going to be left out of care? We can't do that. Access to treatments and therapies. If we're looking at all these expensive biologic treatments now, how is that going to happen? Where will the budget for it come? We're 2 years into a pandemic. It's not going away. And we now have millions of people affected by COVID, which isn't even properly recognized yet as a new pathological area. So we've got to be much smarter here about what we're doing in health. Optimize use of health, personalize it, but realistically, segment, group people with similar preferences, priorities, difficulties, disease issues, and tackle the whole spectrum of health in a very different way.
And you mentioned before, and I know that you're very involved from a digital perspective, you mentioned the importance of IT, the arrival of AI to help do exactly what you're talking about in terms of personalization and so on. Again, I'd like to take advantage of your experience and ask if, you've seen a lot of different digital tools, you've been involved in creating some, and like all of us working in digital health, I'm sure you've had stumbling blocks and successes. And I wonder if you could give 2 or 3 pitfalls that you have seen that should be avoided as you create digital tools to help patients deal with both behavioral and therapeutic elements of their diseases.
Yeah, I think, design is fun, but it's very hypothetical. And putting something hypothetical into real life setting is very different. So sometimes less is more in the design phase, I think, and more concentration on testing and trying is important with different types of user groups, you know. Also, we must remember that there's a reaction against digital for many parts of society. It's not just age related, and now also I think we need to be a little bit wary of that, because people want to go back to the face to face. Of course, it's kind of even the nostalgia of face to face, you know. So I think what we're designing, we have to make a space that it's not purely digital. There's a interactive face-to-face time, and hence that concept of blended care, which is different for different people. Some people want 80% digital, some people 20%, and I think we have to be flexible with that in design. Also, I think that budget on design, don't go full out, keep budget back for that tweaking in the design. If you have to come back to it, if you've tried and tested it and there's something not quite right there, at least you've got time to redo. Otherwise you'll end up with no budget, and then you could be months, how long, waiting for a new budget to do what you already needed. So and your IT can get out of date so fast at the moment. I think that we need to be careful about that. And I also think that the going back to the drawing board, rethinking through the pathways, the care pathways, the journeys, be slightly ahead of the market, but not too far ahead, because it takes people a long time for cultural change when you're talking about critical mass. So it's a fascinating journey, but it's very challenging too.
Well, I'm certainly noting down some of your advice here in terms of what we do. What I hear from you in particular, if I can summarize, is less is more. Don't over design. Test as much as you can. Remember to build real blended approaches, not purely digital, but that also incorporate actual human intervention. Make sure that they are actually implementable, that you don't create something that could require some crazy budget to put into place. Yeah. Does that pretty much summarize your key points there?
Yes, it does. And then also, I think we have to be really aware of the times that we're in. I mean, it's happened to us that we've had a product about to come to market just before a pandemic. So the societal change was like phenomenal, and we had no idea how that would pan out with that particular product. But those black swan moments aren't going away, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, you're undoubtedly right. Yeah.
We seem to be living in black swan for far too long, and then that's a challenge. But hey, that's the decade of the world that we're in, really.
It is. So I have one last question for you, Shane, as we always ask all of our guests here at Small Talk Big Issues. If you're so inclined to share perhaps what got you involved so strongly and so centrally in terms of patient advocacy.
Well, my son was born with a rare disease, alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, 23 years ago, actually. And it was when he was born, there was very little information available about that disease. So I immediately started, the internet fortunately did exist, it was just about coming in then. And I hooked into different people in the US, actually a fantastic foundation in the US, Alpha-1 Foundation, and an otorhinologist in Spain she had lung emphysema. In Alpha-1, the majority of people were respiratory affected with emphysema and what they term as genetic COPD. So I got involved in rare disease and chronic disease quite early on, respiratory. And actually, I felt that the majority of people were asking for the same thing around the world, which was, better care, access to the treatment they need, all the therapies, good rehab, good care regimes, care plans that they could follow, and good guidance from their healthcare professionals. So I think that this is actually possible with the digital environment and the networking that we have nowadays. And the pandemic's shown us that we can all adapt to using these new tools to monitor our own self-care or receive the guidance that we need from the multidisciplinary teams. We can also get psycho-emotional support when we need it, which is actually incredibly important now for most individuals, not just people who are affected by chronic or respiratory disease. Checking our progress online or helping us to get in Western situations, all that seemed to me incredibly important. So when the internet sort of took off a bit more, I thought there's a lot more to this than just Facebook. So I did a master's in e-business, actually, in the early stage with the University Polytechnic in Madrid, which it was a fantastic course, and it helped me to recycle and get back up to speed with what we could really do. What were the advantages of the internet and e-business and the resources. And so I decided that I'd like to do a digital self-care program for respiratory diseases. And that's when I established the foundation, because we needed to have a good technical clinical team approach, a large number of stakeholders initially, begin to develop a care plan that would work online, get it validated with expert physicians and clinical societies, and then do the clinical study. So that's how the foundation was born, really. It was to make self-care available to people, in a new way. And obviously we're on a big journey, and we've had the pleasure of working with you in behavioral sciences, and I hope that continues, because there's still a lot of work to do, but it's a fascinating and very, very important legacy, actually, for society, I think.
I certainly agree with you, and I know that you've done so much good for patients throughout Europe, really, and it has been a great pleasure and extremely informative to have you with us at Small Talk Big Issues. I look forward to working together personally in the future, and thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you very much to all of you.